Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Ford, and we are here for day 11 of the 12 Days of Litmus, and this is books that you go to when you're really not feeling it. And, oh, look at me go. One of the things that is sort of confusing is the fact that I am, by definition, a millennial. But I don't have a TV, I don't have the internet at my place, any of the normal trappings that a millennial might have, but possibly the most millennial thing about me is the fact that, so, like LeBron James always says, he's a Cowboys fan and he's a Yankees fan because he is inspired by greatness, which is a weird thing for a kid from Cleveland to say. Because I think that is a millennial thing to be inspired by greatness as opposed to your favorites. Whereas often in the past, I think people were inspired by their favorites because it was what they knew the most about, what they were the most exposed to. So it was easy for you to draw inspiration from the things that you liked best. But the millennial generation, growing up, one of my favorite football players was Walter Payton, who I never saw play because I was able to watch highlight videos. I was able to watch documentaries on Walter Payton and his time in the NFL, which is something that I think previous generations were not quite as privy to. And it's another thing, so sticking within the sports realm, which I won't do for the entire video, I promise, top 10 lists. Right? ESPN's top 10 plays of the weekend, you know, things like that. Our generation grew up with those things. Those things were easily attainable to us. When you go a little bit later into life, things like LimeWire, Kazaa, Napster, we were able to listen to all of the greatest bands, not the stuff that our dad told us about, right? So we were able to find things that other people enjoyed, that massive amounts of people enjoyed, and we were not left to inherit music from anyone else. We were not left to simply find something on our own that we would like. We were exposed to all of the greats in mass. So for me, my favorites obviously are Ernest Hemingway, Chuck Palahniuk, George Saunders, but these are not necessarily the texts that I go to be inspired. And Steve Donahue made a good point in his video when he announced that he would be doing this challenge, the 12 Days of Litmus, that he's never not feeling it, that he just writes anyway, which is a good point, and you have to have that little bit of gumption to you. But I think that to be able to grab a book and draw some little bit of something is also helpful. So for me, those books are as such. One, literary and thematic terms, a dictionary of literary and thematic terms, which I picked up a long time ago. And it's something that I won't sit down and read from it, obviously, but you sit down and you catch one definition from something and it just sort of makes you think on a term. And so when you're exposed to a term, it's one of the ways that my mind works is you think of the opposite. What is the opposite of this? What is the inverse of this? What are those things which this definition implicates? And that's always something that it doesn't necessarily inspire a poem or a short story or a novel idea, but it gets the wheels turning, which is something that is very helpful when it doesn't seem like those wheels are going to get going at first. Let me see here. This is inspiring for two reasons. One, Shakespeare obviously is probably easily termed the greatest of all time, right? I think you could make other cases. It would be hard for someone to tell you you're wrong if you do say Shakespeare. And Harold Bloom is another person that, when you think of criticism, he is one of the people at the forefront, the tip of the tongue. When you think of criticism, when you think of English literature, when you think of anything having to do with the written word, because he puts in work. And though I am not particularly a big fan of Shakespeare, It is interesting not only to read the greatest of all time, but to read what possibly the forefront intellectual celebrity, if you will, on English literature thinks of the greatest of all time. And this is one that goes through all of Shakespeare's works, the plays, and just dissects them in ways that I never would have thought to do. And obviously that's why Harold Bloom is Harold Bloom. But keeping along those lines, the best poems of the English language, selected and with commentary by Harold Bloom. This is from Chaucer through Robert Frost. This is a really stupendous piece of work to have in anyone's collection, because not only do you have some of the poems that Harold Bloom figures are the most important and vital to the English tongue, but they're obviously delineated by the writer, and there is commentary on every writer at the onset of that writer's chapter, but there's also from time to time comments on individual poems. So this is really, if you are into poetry or trying to get into poetry, this is a book that I very strongly suggest that you at least check out. It's $20. You can't beat it for $20. Now I'm assuming that's because most of these works are public domain, but when you throw in the little bits that you get from Harold Bloom, that value is second to none. Sticking on the theme of writers that I am not necessarily a fan of, Stephen King's Danse Macabre. It is impressive and inspiring to see one of the greats sit down and basically give his dissertation on the genre that he writes. It is a shame that we never got something like this from Michael Crichton for science fiction, but the fact that we do have something like this from Stephen King makes up for it a little bit, because there's just so much in here. First off, the guy has an encyclopedic memory of every episode of The Twilight Zone that he ever saw, every horror novel he ever read, every horror movie that he watched in crummy theaters back in his childhood. And it's impressive, more than impressive, it's a little bit stilting to look at that and look back at your own childhood, for me anyway, look back at my own childhood and realize that I don't remember anywhere near the amount of stuff, let alone in the vivid detail that Stephen King does. And it sort of makes you rack the brain. Why is that? Is it possible to restir memories such as that? And just being along for the ride as he breaks apart what horror means. And I'm not going to be able to quote it, and I can't find it right now, but he breaks down horror into three levels. There's shock and awe, there's horror, and there's terror. Shock and awe is like when you watch a movie and someone's head explodes. It's revulsion. Horror is when you see a pack of zombies coming and you know they're going to eat you. That's horror. Terror is when you realize that the real monster in this situation is you, because when that pack of zombies is coming, you broke the guy next to his knee so they'd all get him and you ran away. You're the real monster there. So that's one of the small things that you get in a compendium such as this. I mean, this is 450 pages of Stephen King rambling about horror, which is something that he has cornered the market on for decades. And he's still writing. And lastly, one of the things that never fails to draw some type of thought process from me. I'm an atheist, so I hope that this isn't too far for anyone, but picking up the Holy Bible and just skimming through, there's always something that that conjures thought. Makes me think about something one way or another. You know, there's a famous story from Christopher Hitchens, I think it's from Letters to a Young Contrarian, in fact, where he, one of the letters is asking him how he finds the chutzpah to get up every day and do it, and attack, and go on the literary charge. And he says one of the things that he does is he picks up, I believe it's the New York Times, and in the top corner of the New York Times every day, there's the little headline, all the news that's fit to print. And it always pissed him off, because it says all the news that's fit to print, and he wants to know by whose standard. So he'd read it, and he'd go story by story, well, this isn't fit to print, or this is done poorly, or why are we talking about this instead of that? And that's one of the things that sort of got him going during the day and allowed him to, like I say, front the literary charge. And for me, the Bible does some of that, because one of the things that I always take from reading the Bible is who this book was written for, who is the intended audience. And if you're going with the assumption that it's not written by God, you have to come to the realization that this was not written simply for the Old Testament, a Jewish sect, or the beginnings of the Jewish religion. It was also written exclusively for land-owning males, at least most of it. People that were assumed to have property, people that were assumed to have, in some cases, maybe not assumed to have slaves, but assumed that, yeah, it's okay. That's one of those things. We just, it's in there, you kind of do it. A lot of the assumptions made from the literature and the language used is always something that gets my mind churning. And if there was a God behind this, why is it so dated? Just all those sort of questions that can rise when reading something like this. For me, those things never fail to at least get the wheels turning, and that's sort of what I meant by books to go to when you're not feeling it. Is just to give you some little spark. So that is it for day 11 of the 12 days of Litmus. I hope to see you here tomorrow for 5 reading goals, 5 writing goals, and 5 booktube goals for the new year.